Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation, we're talking with WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie about anti-rioting legislation that has recently passed in the State House. Laura, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
First, tell me, what would this bill do?
Well, the bill would increase the penalties for rioting. It's already illegal to riot in North Carolina law, but it would dramatically increase the penalties, making some things felonies. For example, if you cause, a couple $1,000s worth of damage or et cetera. It would also allow police to arrest people that are rioting or that they think are rioting, and basically put them in jail for 24 hours mandatory hold. And only a judge would be able to shorten that if you could find one, let's say overnight or on a weekend, whether or not they've been found guilty of anything. So they would have to basically serve 24 hours as a cooling off period. Now, the supporters of the bill say that that's necessary because they say during the riots in 2020 in Raleigh, for example, that they had rioters who would basically bond out of jail and be back out on the streets before the police officers who arrested them were finished with the paperwork. So that's the rationale for that. But people who are opposed to it say, this amounts to, unlawfully holding people, without a hearing, without so much as a charge even for 24 hours. So, that's kind of the crux of the matter.
And obviously, I mean, this is in direct relationship to the protests that we saw in 2020.
It is. House Speaker Tim Moore is the main sort of mover, sponsor of the bill. He has a condo in downtown Raleigh, and he talks a lot as he's talking about this bill about his experience of, watching from his balcony as the riots were unfolding and the tear gas and the fires and things were happening in 2020. But he insists it's not aimed at Black Lives Matter protests. He says it could count for any protest. He gave the example, of the January 6th insurrection. That would be also something that this would apply to.
It's already illegal, obviously, to break windows, to destroy property, to steal things. So how would this differ from laws that we already have on the books?
Well, it would increase the penalties for it. For example, it would be a felony. So it wouldn't just be like vandalism charge. It would be like, felony rioting, essentially. It would also allow somebody whose property was damaged to sue the person who damaged it for triple the cost to replace it, to fix it. And the reason for that, we were told during the debate, is some business owners, their insurance doesn't cover civil unrest. So if their storefront gets broken over and over again, for example, as it was for some, they don't have insurance to cover that. So they have to pay for that out of pocket. So they say it's important for property owners to be able to go after the people who do the damage to try to help make them whole for it.
So you touched on this a little bit. In general, what are a lot of Democrats saying about this and the governor?
Well, to be fair, some Democrats support it. 6 of them voted for it in the House. But, their concern about it is that it is, number one, seems to be aimed directly at Black Lives Matter because that's sort of what spawned this. And number two, they say it's going to chill people's right to assemble. You do have a First Amendment right to peacefully assemble. And they say that people are going to be afraid that if they go to a protest and somebody starts to riot, that they're going to end up being charged with rioting, being held in jail for 24 hours, maybe even getting a felony on their record when maybe they had nothing to do with it, right? Because you think about how many people sometimes go to protests. If there's a group of 4 or 5 or, 40 or 50 who are doing damage, there are thousands at the other end of the street who know nothing about it, but who could be, find themselves in trouble for it. That's what their concern is.
And you mentioned Speaker Moore. He is personally invested in this. I understand he's been really lobbying for this, which isn't always the case with the speaker in terms of legislation.
Right. It's pretty rare for him to get involved. But as I was saying, he does have, that personal experience with what happened in 2020. And he was an eyewitness to it downtown, he says. And so I think that's sort of what prompted him to, to run this bill. As you say, it is unusual for him to sponsor bills, to speak for bills, and in this case, do all the above plus fast track it.
And I'm just curious, thinking kind of on the fly here, we're talking about the police having to enforce this. Do we know what law enforcement agencies, how they feel about this? Because obviously it's more work for them in a way, or do they see it as a tool that will help them do their jobs better?
Well, most of the folks that we've heard from in law enforcement have said that they are in favor of this because they say it will make it easier for them to, they say, find the troublemakers. They say, for example, we heard from somebody who was a sheriff down in the New Hanover area and who helped with the rioting there in Wilmington, and said that, they had big protests that went on for days after the death of George Floyd, but they only arrested 6 people for actual rioting. So they say they do have the capacity to tell the difference, to differentiate between people who are there peacefully protesting, and people who are, there to cause trouble. And, we also heard from some supporters who said, they are in favor of peaceful protests, and this helps to protect the people who are peacefully protesting from the people who just come in to make trouble.
Okay, well, thanks for that information, Laura. We're going to be back after the break with more from Laura Leslie about what people in the community are saying about this legislation. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie about an anti-rioting bill that some people in the community believe is racist. Now, I know you spoke with Dawn Blagrove. She's an attorney and the executive director of Emancipate NC. What does she have to say about this proposed legislation?
Well, she is the one that, in fact, called it racist, quote unquote. One of several. She said that this bill is aimed squarely at Black and brown communities who are historically most likely to be protesters, because that's, in some cases, the way that they feel they have the most power. If not, they feel like they're sort of disenfranchised, and, they may take to the streets, for example, like the civil rights riots that we saw. So they say this is squarely aimed at communities of color and lower income communities and the people who are most likely to protest.
And in terms of specific parts of the bill, I mean, are they just against it altogether, or are there very specific things that they're opposed to?
Well, there are very specific concerns that they have. One was that the bill started out with a 48-hour jail hold. They were able to amend that in the House in the final vote to 24 hours. So it's a little bit less onerous that way. There's also concerns about how police are going to be trained to differentiate between rioters and protesters. And there was language, I think, that was added to the bill that will require basically some training standards to be put in place for police, so that they kind of have a standard to go by, right, as they're trying to enforce this law. Like, who would this apply to and who would it not? But like their real serious main concern here is that this is going to chill protests, because people are going to think twice about coming out to a protest, because if somebody else at the protest starts doing something violent, they could find themselves charged with rioting. And, a lot of people would not want to risk, possibly losing their job, losing custody of their child, over, going to a protest.
Are other states passing or have passed similar legislation?
We have seen a raft of those bills that have passed in a lot of red states like North Carolina since the death of George Floyd and those riots in 2020. So there's been a lot of this sort of chilling legislation. There are civil rights groups that have attempted to fight it in court. A lot of those cases are currently in process.
Tell me what the status is now. Where is it, and what's likely to be the next step?
Well, the bill has passed the House. It will go through the Senate next. Now, it's up to the Senate to decide when and whether to take it up. But Senate Leader Phil Berger told reporters last week that he thinks it's likely that it probably will get through the Senate as well. He said a lot of people there support it. You probably remember that a similar bill to this passed in the past, and Governor Roy Cooper vetoed it then, and they were not able to override the governor's veto. However, because the Senate now has a supermajority of Republicans and the House is only one shy of a supermajority, they think they have a pretty good chance of overriding the veto this time, especially since one of the bill's sponsors is Shelley Willingham. He's a moderate Black Democrat from Eastern North Carolina, and there were several other Democrats who voted for it as well. And so they think this time, they may be able to get enough Democrats to turn against the governor to make this work.
And I'm assuming there was a lot of debate in the House, and do you expect more debate on this in the Senate?
Oh, I suspect so. And I expect we'll hear a lot more about it as it goes through from the same groups that have spoken out against it in the House as well. I think it'll be a pretty a heated debate.
And how long could this process take?
It could take up to it could take up to 2 years. I mean, that's how long the session goes. The bill it's already got through one house, so it will stay alive until, the end of 2024. But I would anticipate that we'll probably see action on it within the next month or so.
Laura, thank you so much for your reporting on this and your insight. I know you will continue to follow this. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.